It is Sunday, July 5th, 2020 on our Sunday call, and we're talking a lot about divorce and custody and a lot of the pain that goes into that. Whew. Man, this one is actually a message for women on how women need to carry the message to other women of how bad we can psychologically damage our kids in a divorce and a custody battle. And I'm just going to say this. My whole mission with men is to carry the right message. And this is where I disagree with a lot of the men's groups. Like, a lot of it is to be over masculine and hyped up and speak from your pain and all this sort of stuff and dominate. That's not the solution for men. And I believe I have a solution which is much better and builds bridges. And currently I'm doing a lot of interviews with women and talking to them about trying to build bridges around trauma, sex, and all these different things where we're at war with each other. Women, you need to carry this message, because if this comes from men, it will not be listened to. And what happens when we get into these divorce and custody battles? Both women and men do things wrong, but these are some of the things that women do wrong that need to be fixed and healed by women, because men's rights is not the right voicing for you to be listening to. Okay, so what happens in a divorce? We go through this thing, and the women take the kids. Very common, right? Right or wrong, we're not looking at the individual pains and the consequences of being married to this guy. Are women take away the kids and they put up a wall, and this is a big thing. And we hear this over and over again: women weaponizing kids, women poisoning kids. I want to get away from that talk quite a bit, because I want to really talk about how this is going to affect your son and daughter later in life. And literally, they're my clients, right? So they go to war with the dad, and then they go to court and do a custody battle thing, and they're fighting. A couple things that happen is that women will say that children don't need their fathers, or they need their fathers, but this father, this dad in particular, is bad. So for this reason, we're cutting it out. He's so dangerous that I had to make this decision to leave, that he's a danger to these children. This is going to be terrible, right? And your child is going to be 5 years, 6 years down the road, or when they're 14, 15, 16, 17, whenever this happened, but years after it happened. Maybe you guys split when you were 3 or 5, 10, whatever it is. But that child is going to build massive distrust against you and against women in general. This is a constant pattern. And even if it's only 10% of the time, that is a horrible thing to be adding to our environment and our society. If you get a divorce, that's fine, okay? But how do we do this right? How do we do this so we don't psychologically damage our kids? The whole idea that your ex or the father of your children is unnecessary can be kept from the kids, and telling that to your children is terrible. That will build massive scars and will affect them. I mean, think about this. A lot of children will be convinced by their mother that the father was bad, and it could go vice versa. I mean, men do the same thing, right? I handle that conversation with men all the time. So when that happens, going, man, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, my mom lied to me. I can't trust her. She's unstable. Then everything else starts to be unraveled, which probably or may not matter in the situation of deception and distrust towards her, and then leading into distrust towards women and leading into distrust towards relationships. This hyper level of masculinity that we see, where it becomes toxic and ridiculous and over posturing and inability to admit weakness or fault or vulnerability, stems all from that. It stems from that happening. Man, that is more important than our culture, the movies we watch. If Marvel is, poisoning men, it has to do with how women have handled this situation. Now, women, when you're handling this situation, and again, I'm not a women's coach. I'm not trying to say that. I'm talking to women to build this dialogue. Instead of just looking at feminism to blame people, feminism had some great qualities to it, but it's to blame and not be responsible for these issues. Women, you are responsible for teaching other women to carry the pain and the breaking and that traumatic feeling of going through a breakup, whether it was inspired by you or it was done to you, to do it in the safe way. Meaning, talk your trash amongst your friends. Don't involve the kids. Don't poison the kids. Here's how you need to handle your situation with your kids, and they need their father, and they don't need to look poorly at their father. in any way. Okay, the other situation that happens, which is just terrible, which came up on the call, perhaps this should have been the first thing, is the whole surrogate father relationship. There's a lot of different people that talk about this, and it does not get talked about enough. This should have its own video. There's a lot to this, and this happens over and over again with the groups. So there's guys in my groups whose mom and dad went through a divorce, or maybe the mom was widowed, and then all of a sudden the responsible son had to be the man. Right? Whether that's the oldest son or the youngest son, the middle son or whatever, had to be the man in the house, and all of a sudden is being put in this role. This is a terrible thing, right? Terrible, terrible deal. And when that happens, this child is going to learn a lot of coping mechanism traits in all the situations we're going to talk about here. They're going to learn a lot of coping mechanism traits that are going to make them really responsible, really good, really together. And at a certain point, that's going to stop working in their life. So that may help them build a career. That may help them build an identity. That's awesome. That's great. But then there's this weird battle of like, wait a minute. Once again, my mom deceived me. Once again, 5 years, 10 years down the road, when they're in their 20s, when they start a family, these things are going to happen, and they're going to have these highly codependent relationships that come from it. They're not going to have a good sense of self, and that may not be it. They might massively rebel in their 20s or when they start a family. And those rebellions, think about this. When you were 25 years old, when you were 22 years old, or you go through a divorce when you're 30 or 40 or whatever age, those rebellions, how were you if you didn't have a sense of identity? If your identity was ripped from under you when you're trying to discover your own identity, what would that do? And this is, again, what you're doing to your child. To understand the depth of this is, I get it. You may not be thinking in this moment like, oh man, I'm making my child the man of the house. But putting those pressures of like, you need to listen to me. You need to make me feel better. I'm sad. We need money. The stresses of single motherhood are being carried over to you. And this child, a man or a boy, girl, whatever it is put in this point of shock and insecurity. This is like unbelievably just damaging. And so what do we do to help with that damage? Get with your women's groups. Get a women's group that isn't obsessed with blaming men or obsessed with just feeling good and getting grounded. You might need to blame men. You might need to feel good and get grounded, but you need to be responsible for your kids in ways that don't just reflect you as a good mother. You need to be responsible for your kids in ways where you respect their emotional needs for their father. This is so important. And the problem is only men's rights speaks to this, and this like, women suck and da-da-da-da. Man, I get it. The pattern is clear. When women go through a breakup, some of them can get overly nuts about territory and whatever. It's a common problem. Common problem means other people can come up with a solution of how they did this in the right way, how they calmed those things down and didn't involve their kids in that. This other thing too is the excuse of a woman being allowed to be nuts. One of the things that happened in my relationship, my ex immediately tried to use my previous injury to a child charge to say that I was abusing the kids just because she got caught doing some shameful, stupid stuff, right? In that, I remember telling one of our mutual friends, and our mutual friend literally said to me, of course, man, she's Latina, and started laughing. I'm sitting here going, one, I'm heartbroken about my family being broken up. I can't see my kids, but I have a potential child abuse, somebody very malicious, telling my family members, telling my sister-in-law, telling other friends, and ultimately the way that, it all unfolded, telling their lawyer that this was their plan of attack of what they wanted to do, was to put me in jail by saying I was a child abuser, a drug dealer, and a human trafficker. 3 things which are kind of ridiculous when you look at my life. So this being said, I hired a good lawyer, switched it, ended that. But this is inexcusable. This is crazy. Do you realize how nuts that can be? So I'm going to step back, take it out of my own personal story. That is terrible. This is not cool. That is not a fun or funny thing. Like, oh, she's just in an emotional state. No, unacceptable. Women, you need to step up and start telling other women that this is unacceptable. I get it. You might want to leave a relationship. I get it. You might want to stop that relationship. I get it that is a difficult decision, but that does not mean that you start making up false accusations. And it's so common. It's so ridiculous. What happens in a court? And it's almost like I wish people had more awareness of what the law is, because in all these things, I've found some awareness of what the law is, but it took me a long time. But how many people jump to alcohol abuse, drug abuse, physical abuse, physical domestic abuse against them, abuse against the kids, sexual abuse, just is this thing which is convenient to encase their emotions. And let me just tell you, an abuse charge or abuse claim has to be taken seriously. The more that you do it just because you're emotionally wound up, or you suspect, or it could have happened because you're emotionally wound up, this wrecks the system. This pisses off more men. And worst of all, right? So forget about all the social causes of like building a terrible community of men, because that's what it has done. That's what it has done. And then now we have these solutions that, in my opinion, miss the mark big time. They're 90% right, but that 10% where they're wrong is really wrong. So this is like the red pill and MGTOW groups. They can work great as a support system for men, but is the solution being proposed, at least for the red pill, is off, man. Power, control. You don't want that. But those are the social problems that come with it. But your kids, I never understand this. I do understand it, but it makes no sense. And I want it to make sense to you. A woman gets pregnant. She has a baby shower. It's beautiful. She gets all the prenatals. She gets all the stuff which may or may not matter in certain things. She changes her diet. Her whole nest and home is the most important thing to her. And a good man supports that, and that's great. When it comes to breaking up, without the awareness, she's not realizing how much she is damaging those kids. And when you do things like false child abuse claims, when you do things like make your own kid an adult too quick, when you do things like lie to him and deceive to your son or daughter about how bad your father is, or maybe you're not lying, maybe you're not, but you do things like that, whether that's verbal, whether that's not allowing certain time, whether that's making up a story about, oh, daddy's just at work, or he can't see you, or mommy and daddy are doing something new so you can't see him for a month or 2 or 3 months, and somehow that's good, and it's okay, mommy's just going to love you more. That is a lifetime problem that is so bad, and we have a culture that has that. That's probably behind many of women's issues of where they're running into their own personal problems. So you are personally affecting your child in a way which is so damaging. If we don't have this discussion, let me just tell you about the other side of the men's rights discussion of this. It's all over the place. But one of those discussions I hear about all the time. Men come to me and they don't know the story about why my ex and I split. And they sit there and tell me like, Steve, you piece of shit. I read Jordan Peterson and I read the stats and da-da-da-da. You have now like damaged your child and tortured him. There's no hope. You're fucked. Like the only option is to be a harder man and be more authoritarian over women so you can hold your family together because women are crazy and insane. You have a thousands of men who believe that and try and live by that. That's what you are making your future husbands. And it's worse. There's people that say like, I can't trust women. I will never talk to women. I will only get sexual outlets through prostitutes or through, people that are that I can use, not people that I could ever love because there's no situation of love. Where does that come from? That comes from a long list of, I'm going to say it, men pissing off women, right? Maybe it started there. Maybe women pissed off men, but it comes from mothers and fathers not being able to handle this right. Man, the solution is much deeper than just what you hear from certain people saying like, oh man, you're going to damage your kids in this way. No, we got to talk. But one of the ways that we got to talk is to stop inflicting so much unnecessary damage amongst your kids. It's ridiculous though. It's ridiculous. Best thing you can do right now if you're a hurt man or a hurt woman, Get with a good group of guys who can see some perspective. All right. Get yourself through the process of pain and victimhood and all these different things and make your life better. But one of the things I hate, because this is a track record for me, is I may have whatever problems, but I do make my life better. I make my life better and I get it. I make my life stronger for dealing with certain situations where, I'm going to have to go over with my kids later. But man, to see the damage that has caused my kids personally from little situations like that is crazy, man. And that is terrible. That, to me, is some of the worst abuse I've seen. And it's not abuse that a judge needs to get involved in. It's abuse that we socially and you personally need to be aware of and start to change. Check your emotions. Check that shit. I get it, man. I get it. Big time. But check that. And women need to have this discussion. If they don't, we're only going to build more conflict with men, getting into this over hyper masculine stuff that they're just boys and don't really know how to do it. They don't get the consequences of it. And that's who the husbands are going to be. That's who the fathers are going to be. And that's what we are making our society. So that's what we got to change. Anyway, hopefully this made sense. I don't usually make videos for women. And if you're a father, you got something out of this, hopefully it doesn't involve a bunch of hate and anger and judgment and we get to a solution. All right, later.